Okay, so with that out of the way, I guess we can move on to actually starting the stream here. So, hello everyone, and as it says everywhere pretty much, we are going to be doing a lore-focused stream here. Yes, we'll be doing beginnings focus from Korra, of course. The 2 episodes from Book 2 Spirits, of course, that are the origin of the Avatar story. But do treat this as very much being a general lore stream. So if, we need to have a side topic about something else, we can absolutely go into that. It's not all entirely just about just beginnings, and that's all. Straight away, like I have on screen here, just a few kind of notes before we begin, because yes, I think a reasonable amount of this is going to be sort of counter-criticism style discussion, so just so we're doing this in the kind of most fair way possible, it should be noted about beginnings that, hey, Korra tends to be rather maligned in the fandom overall, but interestingly, on a more general, broad perspective, these 2 episodes are quite well liked. They are both rated, like I think both above 9.2 on IMDb ratings, which is obviously a more general thing. It's not entirely just the fandom giving the show those ratings. And they're a good kind of estimate. And that puts both of them in like the top 10 for Korra episodes overall. So that's just to kind of note that, it's not necessarily the case that the people who don't like Book 2 overall are the same people who don't like the lore presented in beginnings. There is a little bit of a difference. There is some overlap, but that's the situation there. The heavy criticism of these episodes in terms of the lore being incorrect is not a wide opinion, but it is an opinion that comes up every so often, so we will address it. From a more personal perspective on this, in terms of how I discuss Avatar online, there are very few topics, I think, in the fandom that get me sort of like annoyed when I see it come up. And this is probably one of maybe 4 or 5 specific topics that does tend to at times get me frustrated when people like denying the lore of beginnings kind of, it interrupts a discussion that you're having that we need to clarify in a way what the actual lore of the franchise actually is, even though it's all kind of mostly right here in this episode. It's one of those topics. And then to be clear, it is okay if you have issues with beginnings. Everyone has different opinions on things. It's perfectly fine if you feel that way. That's the big thing to get across here. When we're doing our sort of counter-criticism here, like, I'm not going to be trying to do this in a way that's making fun of people or anything like that. And the issue, I think, comes more up with people who attempt to justify this opinion by claiming that the episode goes against the lore of ATLA. This is when it suddenly goes from, it's an opinion, the episode didn't quite do it for me, to, no, my opinion is justified and, very, very valid. I need to speak about it quite heavily because, in my opinion, it breaks the lore established in ATLA. So that means that we do need to sort of distinguish between criticisms that are basically just, I like this, you don't, which are just fundamental like differences in opinions on the show, and then ones that are more based in misinterpretations, the more fact-based sort of like lore-specific dynamic. So we'll discuss some valid debates about this stuff, along with sort of more lore misunderstandings, that side of things. And then this, for me personally, obviously, just, if we're trying to do this as fair as possible, I'll note that I love both of these episodes. And I say that as like a Avatar sort of quote unquote lore master, in that if anyone was going to have a problem with the lore stuff in Korra, it was probably going to be me. But I don't really have any issues. And to add on top of that, some people might not know this about me. I'm not really a fan fiction writer, but one of the few times I have written an Avatar fan fiction was prior to Korra Book 2 coming out. I think it might have even been before Korra full stop. I wrote my own origin of the Avatar story. and I wrote it on the site, so people who have been on Avatar: The Last Airbender online.com from a bunch of years ago in the build up to Korra might have actually read this. I don't think it's online anymore. I don't think you can find it, but I actually did write that. So the whole idea of like I formed like a headcanon for myself about what the origin story was. It felt like everything was set up that if there was a problem, I would have disliked it. But I still really, really like it. And if you've listened to like the initial podcast review of those episodes, you know that I actually do like it from the start, and I like it to this day. So the other point that I want to make here, and this is kind of an important one as well, can we note before we even start the discussion that on the lore and technical side of things, ATLA is quite vague about its lore and its technical details on things. This, especially when we're talking about spirit-related stuff, needs to be mentioned in the context that the introduction of the spirit world in Avatar is in episode 7 of book 1, Winter Solstice Part 1, the spirit world. It's even called the spirit world. And is that not an actually surprisingly vague and confusing showcase of apparently the spirit world, with the whole blue Aang spirit and Heibai taking people to the spirit world, but Aang never actually goes to the spirit world and stuff like that. That's not a good situation. That in so many ways, the explanation for your introduction to the spirit world requires Korra stuff to actually fully explain. And in a way, that one is actually so out there in a way and slightly complicated that it actually requires you to go into book 3 to get the explanation through like Janora's spirit projection technique, though we technically see that in book 2 as well. So it's just one of those ones. It's very interesting. So I do want to note this, the vagueness of Avatar's lore. So if you do form headcanons about how things should or how they actually do work, note that there's not a lot of like details there overall, and it's a bit of a weird one. So let's get into the list here. So this is kind of like the first thing for chat here, is I have this list of topics here to go over. I have a couple of notes on these specific topics, but obviously let me know if there are other ones that you want to see covered. And also let me know which one you want to see done first, because I have a feeling that, like, do we need to address this more general point first, perhaps, before we get into some of these specific ones? But these are things that I'm not just making these up. These are actual things that I have seen people say online in discussions that I've had with people, because I think most of us have interacted with people who have issues with the lore of Avatar and stuff like that. It's one of those things. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, yeah, this is our list. Obviously, we can do more if needed, but this is sort of the order I initially have on it. We won't go too much into it right now because it's just a list and there are more details to get into here. But yeah, unless people really want me to start here, I probably will just start up at the top here with this one. I know, to be fair, I also do have this. I have like my own kind of favorite lore topic, so we can have the more positive discussion that's not just countering criticisms and stuff like that. So, I'll note some of the things that I think are really good about Korra Beginnings and Book 2 is amazing clarification on the spirit world transfer mechanics, expansion on the idea of the human spirit combinations and the energy limits on the body. And I think something that will come up probably sooner rather than later in these discussions is, or in the origin of the Avatar story, you have to make the Avatar an incredibly difficult thing to replicate. You have to justify with the explanation where the uniqueness comes from in the origin. So that's that. So let's see, a question here. Have you seen Hello Future Me's video on beginnings? Not saying that I agree with him, but that video perfectly elaborates on all the points people use against beginnings. Yes, I actually did watch that a few times ahead of this video, because like I'm talking about at the start here, I didn't want to do this video and have it just be sort of taking the worst criticisms of beginnings, the kind of laughable stuff. So I did go to, Hello Future Me, who I think is a pretty respected YouTuber who does Avatar as one of the topics he occasionally covers, and he has a specific beginnings critique video. Now, I watched it a few times. I do have separate sort of like notes on that one, that, I can bring up. But again, what I will note about that is that I still fundamentally agree with kind of more or less everything he says in that video. Like, he avoids the kind of issue of making it all about the kind of retcons, but he still fundamentally goes back to Avatar presented things like this, therefore beginnings is bad for doing that. And in terms of vagueness, he still struggles, I think, throughout the video to truly nail the point on why beginnings is bad. Like, have you ever seen a video say the word the phrase, it makes it less compelling, over and over and over again, but you still come out of it not really feeling that, like, I'm not really sure what you're getting at. So look, I can reference some of the kind of more elaborate points that he makes in his video, but do again note that, like, my opinion on this is that I like the lore, so even that more stronger kind of criticism of beginnings, more respected sort of criticism of beginnings, is still something that I do not super agree with. By all means, check out that video if you want to, listen to what someone's critiques are that aren't just the kind of very obvious stuff, but even he falls into the trap of some of these issues coming up. And in a way, this is kind of, that video is part of why this is even on the list here. Because at one point in his video, and let me get I actually noted this down as a quote from his video. I think he says something earlier on in the video, but then towards the end he says, when he's coming up with ideas for how beginnings could be better, he says, if the writers were determined to have the Avatar merged with a spirit. And I was just kind of like, wait, what? If? And there's a few things like this that make you kind of go like, wait. Why is this even up for debate? So we do have to discuss this a little bit. Some people do feel that the simple concept of the Avatar being a human merged or having a spirit inside of them as well, a separate spirit, is a bit of a unusual thing, that this is newly introduced in Korra, and not a thing that's been there from the beginning. Now, obviously, you don't see this one around the place as much, but like I said, Hello Future Me sort of alludes to the idea that this is not necessarily the way he always viewed it. So it goes back as far as episode 3. Oh no, it's his Avatar spirit. He must have triggered it. I'm going to try and calm him down. From escape from the spirit world to the kind of setup for the story. And your Avatar spirit has been injured. And the whole plot of Escape from the Spirit World is Aang restoring his Avatar spirit in a very, very similar way to the way Korra in Beginnings also has to sort of recover from an injury to the Avatar spirit. But interestingly, the idea is that in both cases, the injury is kind of like the opposite ends of the cycle. Korra injures the very beginning of it, which is why she has to connect all the way back to the start. Aang injures like the front bit of it, so he has to connect with the most recent avatars. And I think that's a nice little kind of thing between the two of them that actually works out quite well. So yeah, I just have it down here as like, in ATLA, Rava is only referred to as Aang's Avatar spirit, but it's clear that this is not just a very odd way of referring to Aang's spirit, and is instead referencing the spirit that allows the Avatar to be the lore rule breaker that it is. So this is where I think we have to really bring up that concept of, the idea of like, this does need to be explained. Like the idea that the Avatar as a concept within Avatar should be kept a mystery is a bit of a confusing concept to me, because the entire premise of it as a unique sort of entity within the show is the only multiple bender. They have some sort of spiritual powers beyond just other people who are spiritual within the Avatar world. And they have this kind of history to them through the cycle as being a being that will always seek to try and bring the world into balance and solve issues for the world, as well as being the bridge between humans and spirits when that sort of stuff comes up. So yeah, Is this one, when it gets brought up, is clearly just a case of people missing these references to this. But really, the idea is, how else do you explain the Avatar powers? These are the sort of questions that you have, where if you disagree with the idea that the Avatar should be in a human merged with a spirit, how do you explain what the Avatar is otherwise? And this is where you get into the idea of like people's headcanons, their fan fictions, their ideas, their speculations. Suddenly they've locked them in, and the actual explanation doesn't match what they've said. And I think that's what a lot of criticism of the beginning sort of maybe ends up being, that you've interpreted some of the vagueness from Avatar in a specific way, and it created issues for you with the more newer content. So that's that. I don't think there's really that much else to go into on that one, beyond that, very clearly, we know the Avatar's always been merged with the spirit. It's just we didn't know what spirit it is. Now, from my experience in the fandom, everyone was always going with either the idea it is the spirit of the planet, referencing the kind of term Avatar itself, or people were going to go with some sort of a spirit of balance or light, which is basically what they actually went for. I never got the impression that the Avatar would be fused with like a minor spirit. It always felt like the Avatar has a notable enough power to it that it was always going to have to be a notable spirit. And I think in that sense that fits as well. But we'll get into the Rava Vatu questions as we go forward here. So next comes one of the two more focused on retcon discussion. So the Avatar state description, basically not being consistent between the 201 Avatar state explanation and beginnings. So let's go over where the problem seems to come in. So Roku in 201 says this: the Avatar state is a defense mechanism designed to empower you with the skills and knowledge of all the past avatars. The glow is the combination of all your past lives, focusing their energy through your body. In the Avatar state, you are at your most powerful, but you are also at your most vulnerable. What do you mean? If you're killed in the Avatar state, the reincarnation cycle will be broken and the Avatar will cease to exist. So where does the contradiction come in here? For most people, it seems to be this line: the glow is the combination of your past lives. And this contradicts with the idea that beginnings ultimately clarifies to us that the glow is actually, the Avatar connecting most strongly with the spirit that is inside of them, and so it's that spirit's energy kind of coming out. Now, this is technically still true, in that when you're in the Avatar state, you are technically utilizing what has happened with all the past avatars before. Everything that they know is sort of possible in the Avatar state. But again, I would frame this more as it's the vague, very specific avenue of explanation that this takes, because the Avatar spirit itself is just flat out left out of this explanation. Now, keeping in mind that the Avatar spirit is mentioned within the show, so it should be mentioned in the context of this discussion, this explanation, but it just isn't. It's not to highlight, how it's not part of the process, but it's just to show that the explanation here is not the full explanation by any means. The focus here is on the past lives, like almost completely, because it's meant to show Aang the danger. That the plan that Fong wants to do in this episode of just sending Aang in the Avatar state at the Fire Nation is bad, because the Avatar state can still, it's not invulnerable, he can still get hit. And if he dies in the Avatar state, that's the Avatar gone. And that's what it's focusing on the past lives aspect. But sure, it doesn't mention the actual explanation, but it's, to me, this is not one where it's like a sealed off, clear cut, like, error. This is just an open explanation that they expanded on. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that. It's just, this is not a particularly, amazing explanation. And I think when me and Greg discussed this on the podcast, that was actually the last podcast review that we did, we kind of both were like, well, yeah, actually, it's not actually like a super strong explanation given all the context of the situation. So now to focus on the main takeaway being how the cycle could end. people then take the beginning's explanation of the Avatar state as a contradiction, because one, as the first Avatar, has no past lives, so why can he go into the Avatar state? When the fact is just that it actually just leaves out that the core power of the Avatar state is the human spirit interaction. It answers the question, the lingering question, the hanging question of, did the first Avatar have the Avatar state? Well, yes, they did. It just worked in a slightly different way. And then for anyone thinking that it perhaps is a bit of a mistake, it's a contradiction what they did there. The Avatar should only be focused on the past lives. Well, we know that spirit enhancement is a thing. This is what Koizilla is. Koizilla is the power of the Avatar in the Avatar state combined with the power of the ocean spirit. Like, we have seen the concept of merging with spirits to enhance power done before already in a slightly different way. And it's one of those things. Let's see, maybe a big part of the complaints is just that beginnings explain things. When you explain things, instead of keeping them vague and free for everyone to imagine them, some backlash always happens. Yes, that is one of the points. I think we'll actually just skip down and do that next after this, and we'll return and do the original Benders. But just to finish off this point, to me, this one is a stretch. This one is a huge stretch to call a retcon. To me, this is the Avatar state explanation. Is a nice explanation on a relatively vague explanation still from pretty early on in ATLA. The past lives are still a factor in the Avatar state. It's just that the core power does come from the Avatar spirit itself. Because one thing here, going back to this, when do we ever, other than this explanation, focus in the Avatar state on the idea that every past life that gets added to the Avatar cycle adds a little bit more? We never go into that level of detail to suggest that, Aang's Avatar state is technically more powerful than Roku's Avatar state because Aang has Roku as part of his cycle. When the reality of it is, everything we've been presented with is that the Avatar state is a pretty similar power level for all of the Avatars. That, yes, we're using all of this together and highlighting the idea that it's the combination of all the Avatar using all of their powers. That's the point. But yeah, I think we need to address the later point here. We'll come back to some of this stuff later. This one. The more general point that in even choosing to tell the story of the origin of the Avatar and explore the spirits, and their world, the spirit world, more, they have quote-unquote ruined the mystery, made Avatar less compelling. Effectively the idea that beginnings is Avatar's version of like midichlorians. That people are trying to conflate these two things together. That this is what they've done in explaining how, the Avatar got their bending, how the Avatar came to be, what spirits are like on a broader sense, is basically doing what midichlorians did. Now, I'll actually make the point that I actually have no problem with midichlorians in Star Wars, because so many people, I think, one, misunderstand what that explanation actually is, and two, I'm never the biggest fan of this kind of point of just like keep the mysteries and stuff like that. This is a weird one because like this is the point. The core point is this. Yes, I do in general agree with the point that yes, some things in a fictional universe should be kept a mystery. Over-explaining is a thing that can happen. But choosing what to explain and what not to explain is the art form, basically. And to me, at least my bar for when you over-explain, you have to do a lot to, at least for me, call something over-explaining, where you've pushed the limits beyond what I feel needs to be explained. I like the details, so I'm okay with explanations up to a pretty big level. In this specific point, I find it rough because I just find it baffling that any Avatar fan would actively advocate for not exploring two of the most unique things in Avatar. The Avatar, spirits, and thus bending. This is what I don't get here, is that, look, there are the origin of the Avatar, in my opinion, needed to be told. given that the Avatar, what the Avatar is, and that it breaks so many of the rules, I think you just had to explain how this actually happened. It is the name of the show. It is what every piece of media effectively in the franchise focuses on to a certain degree. And some of the unquestionable lore of Avatar is no other people can have multiple bending elements. And for the most part, we don't really tend to see too many people who have spirit kind of combination stuff going on. So the origin of the Avatar, I always feel like, yeah, you needed to tell it, especially when you know it is a cycle, and that cycle ultimately goes back to a point. It implies the idea that we'll get around to it eventually. You want an example of some stuff that, say, perhaps should in Avatar be kept a mystery. So keep a mystery. I would say sort of like, I would almost go as far as to say, yeah, origin of the lion turtles. This is something even though I really like the lion turtles and would like them to be explored a little bit more, I'm okay with them never particularly going too in depth on stuff like this. Stuff like this. This is, I think, the point at which, like, yeah, it probably gets overly complicated at this point, and they really run into the idea of, I think, being willing to make some mistakes. When you do this sort of stuff. Like, you know, to make the point, like, I want some more information on the lion turtles, but it doesn't have to be about their origin. I'd like to know more about kind of what drives the lion turtles to do what they do, because as far as we're aware, they are like a physical being rather than a spiritual being, just in terms of the spirit physical dynamic. But I don't think you need to do this in the same way that you needed to do this. That's the thing. Similarly, vague references by ancient spirits to the beginning of the Avatar universe, I think is perfectly fine. I don't think you need to explore stuff like that. Then we get into like stuff like, say, like if you listen to the recent podcast where Braving the Elements podcast, where Mike and Brian were talking about Iroh and Mako, Iroh's original voice actor. They talk a little bit about Iroh towards the end, and they mention the idea with him of, like, you know, the idea of keeping a mystery. So sort of like Iroh's backstory. Again, this is a more nuanced topic for me, where I think you sort of like keep some of it mystery, but sort of in sort of relation to what we know now, I think we need a bit more. That's my take on the Iroh stuff, where I'm okay with the idea that they're not going to do a giant novel all about Iroh. I'm okay with the idea they're not going to do a full comic series about Iroh. But I don't want them to lock the Iroh story away, as in, we can never tell you the details of how these things get connected together. That's what I don't agree with. Like, I think, for instance, with Iroh's backstory, I think little bits and pieces like, I want to see Iroh interact with his brother. I want to see him interact with his father. I want to see who Lu Ten is as a character. So it's not all about the kind of lore of Iroh's backstory. Like, in many ways, like, I don't need to see Iroh, say, like, meet Ran and Shaw, because we saw Aang and Zuko do that. So we assume something somewhat similar happened to Iroh, and it just to avoid repeating ourselves with certain situations like that, we don't, I think, need to see that. Who's Lu Ten's mother? That to me is an example of something where it's just like, why is that a mystery? I understand if you're making the point that, like, you know, for whatever reason, this is a character who, like, is not super important to know about. But it would be nice to just know a little bit more. Similarly, say, like, origin of the Red Lotus. I think that's probably something you do need to talk about in greater detail. But there's a difference between some of these topics and the idea that, like, say, someone mentioned it there in chat, air nomad genocide. I think you need to explain a few more details about the air nomad genocide, but I understand to a degree why they've never full on written a story about it, because it's such a dark topic. It's about the death of, like, so many characters that, you know, how do you do that? How do you get around to doing it? But, you know, there's little bits and pieces to expand upon with that. And I'm always, like, with stuff like that, like, okay, to me, Origin of the Red Lotus needs, like, do a lot in my mind, because we know so little about so many of those characters and the organization overall. That kind of feels like full origin story. Other little bits and pieces, not especially. So it's stuff like that. But there's a huge difference for me between that and just, like, never tell us the Avatar origin. And the big one for me, actually, is probably more than just the Avatar origin, is, like, apparently never explore the spirits. This is a really weird one when I see it, because I do mention it up here, don't I? Explore the spirits and their world. There's a real sense about some people with the spirits that they need to keep these things mysterious entities that should only come up and basically be utilized in the exact same way that Ko the Face Stealer is. That every spirit should be like that, is the impression that I basically get. It's one of those things where, like, I just kind of don't get it, because even in the Hello Future Me video, he kind of talks about this in a very weird way where, like, he almost, like, adds this amazing sense that, like, the presentation of the spirits in Avatar is this incredible explanation of, like, an alien species that's different than humans. And it's like, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, he's trying to frame the idea that they're so different that they have their own different sort of, like, sense of morality and all this stuff to them. And it felt like you're doing a lot of work to try and convince me of something, but it's not really working. Whereas the idea of the spirits is that, like, this is effectively, as far as we're aware, half of the sentient life in the Avatar universe. That we are ultimately exploring topics like the balance between humans and spirits, the conflict, in a way, that has been raging for so long between humans and spirits. What way do we actually attempt to seek a balance between these two sides? And so to do that, you can only do that if you know about both sides. And by the nature of storytelling, when you involve humans, I think most people understand the humanity perspective pretty well. So, you know, that's storytelling. The spirits need explanation because they are different. But I would definitely make the argument that I think when they explore the spirits, the few times when they go into it, they make the point that deep down, when you get past a lot of the I am a higher form of being than a human, the spirits are ultimately characterized as being flawed themselves, that they, at their core, have certain traits that are quite human. Like, the problem that I had with, like, Hello Future Me's video was he brings up the topic of orange and blue morality as this alien kind of sense of thing. And one of the first examples he uses to try and convince you that this is a thing is that he says that Heibai from Avatar is an example of this. Heibai is an example of a character where we can never fundamentally understand his morality because we have basically black and white, whereas Heibai as a spirit has this blue and orange. That it's weird that he is the spirit of a forest and gets angry at that the forest has been burnt down. And I'm kind of like, what point are you making here? Like, that, like, from a human perspective, you can't understand why the protector of a place would get angry and annoyed at the loss of said place. Like, I get it, there are unique spirit elements because he is a spirit and not a human. But the core point of that is that's a very human thing. It's an understandable thing. And he even points out the fact that, like, when Aang gives him the acorn to show that the forest will grow again, that comes from a place of Aang understanding how Heibai feels. To know to do that, to solve the problem, to, in a way, cut through the darkness affecting Heibai in his dark form and turn him back to his normal or light form. And it's like, this isn't the point, this is not a strong version of the point you're trying to make. Even Ko, who is a character who, again, I think is referenced in that video, it's like, okay, he's weird because he helps the Avatar, but also tries to steal their face. And okay, he's mysterious and kind of ominous, and that's cool. But not all of them need to be like that. And there already is a distinct difference, because I think I covered this a little bit up here with the spirit stuff. Where is it? Here. Yeah. So the idea that the spirits in Korra and Beginnings are apparently so different than the spirits introduced in Avatar that it ruins like the intrigue of the spirits, that the mystery is ruined because we have all these other spirits, the Studio Ghibli-esque ones, that it takes away the cool factor that was there with some of the ones we got in Avatar. So again, this is more of a personal opinion one. Like, you're allowed to have an issue with like maybe the design of certain spirits, or have a sense, a feeling that like they maybe lost sight of what the good spirits are or whatever. But the reality of it is, I think when you look at it like this, I'm pretty sure this is most or all of the spirits that we meet in Avatar: The Last Airbender. So we meet Heibai, we see the mortal forms of Tui and La, we meet Ko, the face stealer, we meet the annoying monkey spirit who used to go by Enma, not sure what happened there. We know we met Wan Shi Tong, the painted lady, who interestingly is a spirit who used to be a human, and we meet knowledge spirits. So a lot of people, what they tend to do is sort of go with the idea of, say, like these four, plus you'd say, yeah, Wan Shi Tong. So like 5 of these are in the kind of category of like notable, powerful spirits. And everyone wants them all to be like this, that there should only be a couple of them, that they should all be representative of like interesting, cool topics, and it should be a mystery every time you meet some of them. But then you ignore the fact that the monkey spirit is just a monkey spirit. He's annoyed that Aang is around him asking him questions when he's trying to meditate. A very normal thing, very different than like anything else going on for the most part. Even the painted lady, who is kind of meant to be like a Heibai-esque spirit in that she is the guardian of a specific location, but she's a human, and her design is just a kind of almost like angel-like human. Like it's very, very human. Like in a way, the differences between Katara when she's like dressed up as the painted lady and the actual painted lady are literally just the glow in a way. And then, yeah, it should be noted that like most of them are just animals. Like we have ultimately panda, fish, even Ko to a certain degree. Okay, he has the face stuff up front, but he's like a giant centipede like thing. Monkey, giant owl, human spirit, and then just foxes, just spirit foxes, like nothing super thing. But what is presented here is the idea of like straight away. Here are not kind of quote unquote non-sentient spirits, animal spirits, suggesting the idea that there's other. Similarly, the painted lady presents the idea that not all spirits are animals, which even Tui and La present this idea as well, because La, of course, in its more executing its spiritual power form, is the giant Koizilla-esque thing. Now, we don't know how representative of what its actual form was before it became mortal. And there's that. But the idea that, like, Korra fundamentally changed all of this, I don't really agree with. Because to me, I view it as just, when we go, we just flesh out these categories of spirits, where we meet some that are in the powerful category. We meet some that are more like the Heibai spirits. The Shushi spirits that we meet in both the Yang Chen novels and also Korra Book 2 are good examples of that. Similarly, we have like Ai as a spirit that is very, to me, similar to the monkey spirit. It's a different kind of type of monkey. It's kind of like a lemur spirit type thing. The dragon bird, the dragon eel spirits are interesting because then you have the more kind of animalistic spirits, but like one of them can talk, one of them can't. The spider spirit that captures Tenzin and Co. in the spirit world, I think is one of those ones that kind of stands out a little bit, while also introducing spirits like Carrot Guy, who of course is my profile picture on a lot of places, the friendly mushroom spirit, and presenting the idea there are normal spirits, there are low-key spirits, there are civilian spirits, that if we are going to get to a sense of balance between humans and spirits, we can't just be talking about the all-powerful ones as being everything for Avatar. It can't just be about these. It has to be about the Boomjus as well, of course. The furry foots of this world, and so on. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Like, even when you go into more recent content, establishing the idea that it's not that Korra has shifted the spirit design aesthetic completely. We have stuff like Father Glowworm, which you would say is very much in the Ko style of spirit. Ominous spirits that are, you don't know what's going on with them. Very, like, unique and interesting. Even General Old Iron is a very interesting concept as a spirit, along with Lady Tianhai, of course, as well, where we actually do explore some stuff. And that's the other point in this as well. The comics also do some good spirit exploration, highlighting things like a spirit who chooses to take on a mortal form because they fall in love. Basically, Old Iron being effectively jealous of that fact and struggling with the idea that, why does my friend Lady Tianhai care about humans so much that she would do this? And just like kind of more real kind of topics like that. Introducing the Mother of Faces and actually creating a bit of a kind of parent relationship there between Ko and the Mother of Faces. That Ko steals faces to get his mother's attention. That's a very human thing, kind of like deep down. And that's kind of fascinating because it makes you kind of wonder, one, why is their relationship kind of mother and son? Like, how does that work? Because we assume that spirits don't give birth in that kind of way. But it seems to be the idea that these two spirits, when they came into being, were meant to be spirits that either worked together or are meant to be purposefully opposites of each other. One can take away faces, the other can give faces, and maybe there is meant to be some more balanced way in which they operate, but a lot of it is the Mother of Faces having to be the one to constantly like fix the problems of what Ko did. Because notice, she's unwilling to help Aang in so many situations until she realizes that, oh, one of the people coming here is a victim of my son. And suddenly the kind of the spirit kind of I'm better than you mentality drops a little bit, and she's like, oh, I'll make amends for this. And that's the point here with these spirits, is that yes, there's a unique otherworldly aspect to them, but there's also a very normal aspect to them as well, that the spirits in a way fail to really cover with themselves. And that's what's so interesting, because we can get into it here a little bit, the idea. Yeah. This concept is the core concept with humans and spirits. And it's in a way why the balance is tricky. Spirits don't want change for the most part. Now, some of them end up do. Some of them look at the human world and want that change. Lady Tianhai is an example of that. And I think other spirits are examples of that as well, which is, I think, why some spirits choose to actually go and live in the physical world. Because the spirit world, for the most part, doesn't change. It changes when humans basically go in there. It changes when all powerful spirits kind of like impact the landscape or whatever. But fundamentally, the idea is spirits as a being and their world is stagnant. This is always the exact same because they are immortal, they live forever, and they, even though like they change forms when they die, they literally change. They tend to struggle with the change that humans are so like used to. The idea that, you know, humans live such an incredible life, even though it's short, that is almost like so much more interesting than the life a spirit lives, even though they have all the time in the world to do stuff with. And there's your interesting dynamic to me. Less this, you know, morality, blue, orange, stuff like that. It's concepts like that. What is the common ground between humans and spirits? How are we going to actually achieve balance between humans and spirits? Because we've seen Korra attempt to do it and be very much pushed away by the spirits. They don't really want to deal with her, even though she's the avatar and is realistically one of the few people the spirits are at least somewhat okay talking about and talking with. That's fascinating to me. And it obviously speaks to a certain sense of like the changing also causes humans to in a way change their world, and it gets into the kind of like spirits seem to want to protect nature, but they don't seem to maybe understand when change is the correct thing versus when change is the kind of wrong thing. And there's fundamental misunderstandings there and so on. But again, the core point I would make here is just that, like, I can understand to a certain degree why people don't maybe overly like, perhaps at times, the over-focus on the kind of Studio Ghibli-esque spirits. Some of those ones, it's maybe a little on the nose that they are literally just those spirits. But they don't really focus too much on them. Just to highlight that there are these little tiny little spirits like this. There are just spirits for the most minor things in the world, as well as the all-powerful ones. In the same way that with humans, there are the main characters, the important characters, the world leaders, the powerful benders. But there are also just people who live in towns. And I think it's important to present that side of things as well. That this, you know, the world leaders don't always speak for everyone, and the most powerful spirits don't always speak for the, you know, lower level spirits, whatever way you want to kind of interpret it. But we were talking back here about sort of keeping things a mystery. I think we, for the most part, kind of like covered this. There's that. And yeah, that is a good point as well, in terms of like the spirit world as a location. In terms of the location, like we only saw one, two locations in the spirit world in like all of Avatar. It was kind of clear, I felt, they didn't quite know what to do with it. So they just made it kind of like swampy, rocky, stagnant. You know, they just went for that. The idea that this has never changed. This place has never once changed from the way it was. Ko just waits in this cave and it will keep him happy for 1,000 years to just have one encounter with something in this cave. That sort of a way. Whereas Korra obviously introduced us to the idea that there are more bright sections of the spirit world. There are light sections of the world. And especially because it's the Avatar coming into the spirit world, you understand the idea where, like, for the most part, it's going to be a little bit more leaning in that direction. But it still speaks to the fact that there's so much of the spirit world we don't really know about. Like, I would still say, despite the exploration in the comics, in Korra, in the novels and stuff like that, I still feel like there's so much more we need to get into. I want to see what Korra's approach is to tackling this issue now that the spirits are like able to come into the physical world whenever they want. But also the other point, humans can go into the spirit world now. How is this going to, you know, work, and like how are we going to achieve a balance? That point. But anyway, let's go to some of these other points here. So what do we have here? Yeah, we were going back to this one here. Yeah, the retconning of the original benders to now be the line turtles who gave humans bending. So this is one where we actually have to get into this, because this is the one where, based on at least one quote, it is at least a partial retcon. But I will also note the word retcon doesn't have to be an inherently negative thing. It is often used as a negative point, but a lot of times when you expand on a topic, it is technically a retcon, because this expansion applies to the previous explanation as well. And this is what we were kind of exploring a little bit with the avatar state thing is technically a retcon, but it's not a contradictory retcon. This one is maybe a little bit more leaning in the kind of actual kind of commonly used definition, but even then, as we'll get into here. Look, so the main points that people bring up are these two quotes. UA from 119 says, "The legend says the moon was the first waterbender. Our ancestors saw how it pushed and pulled the tides and learned how to do it themselves." And then Katara, reading the legend of Oma and Shu in 202, says, "The two lovers learned earthbending from the badger moles. They became the first earthbenders." So we will first of all do this. We will straight away highlight this to make that point, and highlight that when it really comes down to it, this is vague enough to where I don't think it's inherently a problem. This line is probably the one that's maybe actually the issue with it. But it's obviously the contrast between it's a legend versus, the the actual reality of the situation. So, this is the problem that I have with interpreting these and making it canon in ATLA when it's presented in a rather vague way. UA presents the entire legend of this in one line, and then Katara reads the legend of Oma and Shu written on their tomb, which obviously happens post their deaths and is referred to as a legend. There's a song about it, and there's a difference between being directly shown what happened as a flashback versus being told roughly about what happened, and that's what's happening here. But if you treat this as being the case, do people really believe that you can turn from non-bender to bender just by basically watching the moon? Because when you treat this as being true, what is being said here? Our ancestors saw how it pushed and pulled the tides and learned how to do it themselves. That is suggesting that literally just by watching something happen, it can have a physical effect on your body that activates basically the magic system of Avatar within you. And we're just meant to be like, yep, that's it. That's how it works. I don't buy that, really. And I've always felt that way. It's why I've never leaned super far in the direction of the animals are the things that kind of matter, because this doesn't make sense. This is a fact. We never see the moon, a dragon, a sky bison, or a badger mole turn a non-bender into a bender. This is never shown on screen to us as happening. So, that is important to note as well, despite there being scenes where we do interact with these animals, where we present the idea that, we see Aang and Zuko interact with a dragon. Doesn't give them some energy-based power. We have Appa with us the entire way through the story in a show called The Last Airbender. Why are we so worried about that? Why does Aang fear for the future of the air nomads if Appa can literally, apparently, make airbenders at will? If Aang can just go to people, hey, do you want to be an airbender? Watch my sky bison. Now you're benders. And look, I get it. That's a rather blunt point. It was probably the implication, perhaps, if you treat this as being the case, is that it was meant to be more of a spiritual thing, interacting with them day to day, watching, truly understanding the philosophy, something happening. But it is rather vague, and it doesn't address the technical point of activating a core power within someone when they didn't have it before. So, you can interpret it to work or not work. It doesn't come across as inherently a contradiction, so the water one anyway. So it really is only the Oma and Shu line where there is any contradictions. The story is presented as a legend. It's written on a tomb. After the death of the characters, it's shown in a vague backstory, a la the Great Divide tribes, rather than a full historical account, a la the Avatar and the Fire Lord. You can see what the contradiction is, and that it does literally say they became the first earthbenders. But this being meant to be taken as the full extent of the story doesn't line up with the rest of the presentation of the original bending animals. We have multiple scenes with them where we don't see these animals give humans bending, which is the case if you take it literally. Yet it's never suggested to use Appa as a solution to the Aang is the last airbender problem. Sokka literally rides a badger mole, but it's never suggested he go from non-bender to earthbender by interacting with this badger mole, or him become a waterbender from his, keeping it focused on his tribe by literally having interactions with the moon. Even when Aang and Zuko meet Ran and Shaw, it's clear it's about the martial art and the philosophy of what firebending actually is, and not that the power makes someone a bender. It's very clear. You just have to, because this is the thing. If you call this a retcon, to me, they retcon this within Avatar. To me, what Korra does is an expansion upon what is presented at the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender. To me, it's quite clear that especially when you get to the Firebending Masters, that episode, which is where they go to see the dragons. It's where you have Toph explain her story of her learning. She talks about it being a martial art extension of her senses. She doesn't mention that I was a non-bender, but then I became a bender by interacting with the badger moles. They just thought her as a fellow blind being to utilize the skills that she had in a way where she could interact with the world in a better way. Aang, even kind of more jokingly, is just hey, maybe you can give me a lesson, buddy. And Appa's just yeah. and that's the kind of reality of it. Yeah. There's a retcon here. It's a very small one, given the overall picture. And even then, it's more of ATLA retconning itself, rather than Korra doing it. Plus, the full explanation is, in my mind, pretty perfectly done. Power, aka ability to bend, comes from the Line Turtles, initially, and is then passed down through the generations as more children are born. The original benders are where the martial art and philosophy to best use and control the power comes from. And this is the point here. I know some people will make the point that it's a broader thing, that they want the bending animals to mean a lot more because it's clear that they're incorporated into the cultures of these nations a lot more. But that's still the case. And this is the point in all of this, is that this change literally just affects this very early point here. The Line Turtles are not really in the series that much anymore. In terms of Aang was the last person they gave any ability to. And even then it wasn't a quote unquote element bending ability. So them giving the power, literally just setting the stage for, from here on out, humans actually have this ability within them to do something. You can now interact with these animals, make it a part of your culture and your history, and go forward. Because I saw someone mention the idea that, it's actually, no, it's more than that. Say for firebending, actually, it shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't be the Line Turtles gave people firebending, because the ancient Sun Warriors explained that the dragons gave them the first fire. And because it's such a part of their culture, that means they couldn't possibly have got the core ability from a lion turtle. And it's like, that still works, even if it's done the way it is canonically in the show. They can still have the core power they got from the lion turtle, and the dragon still be this very important cultural impact on them. And then obviously you get into the idea of like, is that really the very first fire? Is it really like? I'm not sure. That's always been like a bit of a like weird point to me, and that feels like an over exaggeration to present your role in history, and it's more of just in their recorded history it's the first fire, because otherwise it's like you either have to make the point that the dragons themselves as a sort of culture have always kept what was originally back at the start of the universe or whatever, the first fire going, and they then pass this thing on to the Sun Warriors. But again, none of this inherently relies on it being a fact that dragons gave the core power. And that's the big thing with this one, is that for the most part, it doesn't really matter that much that the animals on the moon are not responsible for like literally this thing. Because I think it works better this way. That way you don't have to avoid the weirdness of effectively, well, if they're responsible for both giving people the power and then also the philosophy, but then if it's also the case that bending is passed down through like birth, why do we need to interact with the animals after like a certain point? And that whole thing. And it works better this way, because obviously like this is a thing that continues even when the lion turtles are not around, whereas if you keep the bending animals around capable of doing that, then it doesn't create any like issue with regards to number of benders. Basically, it's a kind of technical point, but and it's as simple as this. Like, I think this is such a clean solution to it. The lion turtles, the original energy benders, were the ones who gave humans bending in order to protect themselves initially. Then, when the Avatar came into being, the lion turtles decided that their time effectively protecting humanity, the era of like the lion turtles guarding over humanity, was over. And it's basically implied, directly confirmed in the show, that right before they left, it feels like it was a situation where they gave everyone the choice. Do you want the power of the element before we leave? And the people who said yes, it basically starts the long line of lineage of bending in the Avatar universe. And I think that's a nice solution, especially because the creators and I think the writing have been very careful about when lion turtles have been introduced into the world, introduced into the show. In that, basically, apart from like one scroll implying a past Avatar met with a lion turtle, and then Aang meeting a lion turtle, everything we know about the lion turtles is in the past, long past. It's this. And plus, it's all explained here, like in terms of any confusion about like them contradicting it. They still have Wan become like the first true bender by learning from this white dragon. And after this, he's actually very skilled. He can do like redirection of fire, and it's clear that like he understands this element on a deeper level than any other thing. And I think that's fine. This is still part of the world. The animals still play a hugely important role in the history of bending, because effectively, once the Avatar comes into being, lion turtles stop being involved for the most part with bending. And from then on out, it is humans themselves and then their interactions with the moon and the dragons that is entirely responsible for everything. The main complaint is how humans receive bending from the lion turtles and immediately start bending with some good skill, instead of spending a long time learning skills. Yeah, that's just one of those things. Yeah, it's slightly unfortunate that the way they had to do it was that, yes, the The lion turtle gives it to you to protect yourself out in the spirit wilds, but they can already bend. The one kind of, I suppose, kind of explanation that you'd have, obviously, is that the hunters that Juan goes out with are used to doing this a little bit more, and so, you know, explain it to him. It also is an interesting point that it is, like, fully grown adults gaining an ability that they know what they're going to be getting. So it's not that, like, sense for, like, a kid growing up, like, am I a bender? Am I not? I've never bent before. Like, can I do this or not? It's, no, I've literally been given this power. I know what it is. I've seen other people do it. So all I have to do is sort of do something. And again, keeping in mind that, like, when Juan does it for the first time, he literally just, like, throws fire. Like, there's no form to it at all. Yes, they have to probably have them have slightly more control than you maybe would want them to have for being complete, like, amateurs. But, like, enough that, like, okay, I can generate fire and, like, throw it a little bit is, to me, it's good enough to hunt and protect yourself a bit. You're not going to win a fight against a master bender, but, you know, that sort of thing. But I like that idea, because it creates the idea of, you know, it's presented with Juan. The others who probably have used fire more than Juan just by going out hunting so many times are just completely outclassed by Juan, who's only been firebending for, you know, a relatively short amount of time, just because he does it in the right way. And that's that point is still valid to this day. That I referenced the firebending masters before. This point, and it's important even for master benders like Aang, and, you know, Zuko at this point you assume basically he's close to being a master, give or take, because he's teaching Aang, so he's good enough to teach someone else. These two characters who have been benders for a long time, them just learning more about the philosophy, the form, the dancing dragon as like a different approach to firebending. It does change, you know, how they are as firebenders. Like, Zuko is clearly better as a bender coming out of this than he was before, because his firebending is directed in the right way and so on. And I think that point shouldn't be undercut just because the core power has a different origin story. I Spear calls them fire tossers is a very good point, and that's the difference. And I think what it changes is that this line here is, you have to change this to sort of be sort of like, they became the first earthbenders, you know, proper earthbenders. They became the first earthbenders who learned from the Badger Moles. And yes, it is still a little bit unfortunate that this line doesn't work out perfectly with what happened later, but I also don't think this changes that much, because Oma and Shu, they are clearly real people, hence why the place is called Omashu. So this is something that happened to a certain degree like this. And obviously this has to have happened after Juan's era, or else it's going on in the background, like during Juan's era. But if this forms a location that stays in the world to this day, you assume it happens after the war between humans that Juan participates in. And obviously during this point, most of the nations are at war. A giant war happens, and the result of that war is what sort of sets the map of the world. Earth Kingdom clearly wins. This is why they control. The Earth Kingdom is the entire middle of the world. Fire Nation retreats to its islands. The waterbenders go up north, not south yet, and that sort of sets the initial map of the world. And it's at this point where you assume no one on the earthbending side of things has perhaps learned from the Badger Moles yet. Who knows how long passes, and eventually these two feuding kind of tribes or towns have this fight either side of the mountain, and in the mountain, when they meet that, you know, that they meet the Badger Moles, and that's what happens. So there's that. So yeah. Now, what have I skipped or not here? So yeah. We were going in order, then we went down to the bottom one. And I think this brings us to some of the more complicated topics. So we already covered this one. Yeah, okay, so here we go. Rava and Vatu. Let's bring up Rava and Vatu. Let's bring up our beloved kites and talk about them here. So the criticism point here is Rava and Vatu, in representing light and dark, is a simplification of somewhat of a previously established dynamic on how balance is in Avatar, or just the general opinion that they're not a fan that Rava and Vatu do represent kind of extreme points, and it takes away some of the nuance from the series, or something like that. Like I say here, in terms of the when was this previously established kind of point, I don't really agree with this. Like that, that there was a previously established balance, that it was all about weird nuances, like shades of grey, that it was previously established that it wasn't full on light and dark, peace and chaos. I don't really see it that way, because what ends up happening here is, I think Hello Future Me covers this a little bit in his video, and he brings up some points, but it's they're kind of cherry picked examples that don't really fit. Again, it's the whole Heibai stuff of it's this very simple point, but apparently there's a lot of spiritual nuance to it, even though there's not really. In my mind, balance in Avatar has always sort of been the idea that balance is light triumphing over darkness, but never truly destroying the darkness. And the situation is interesting, because you sort of have to get into almost examples of this. And to me, look at ATLA's core story. Whoops. It is Aang defeating the evil Fire Lord to end the 100-year war and bring balance. There doesn't appear to be a large amount of nuances, and we have to have a certain amount of chaos as well as balance in this dynamic. And even when you factor in the fact that it is canon, that there is an entity of light, an entity of darkness, the fact that this story takes place in an era of light immediately proves any sense of people saying that this is the way it has to be wrong. Because this is the thing, this happens in an era of light, because it's been an era of light since Wan helped Rava to defeat Vatu. Stuff can still go wrong in an era of light. Probably the biggest point, and I want to make this, and this will affect both points, is that Rava, being the spirit of light and peace, doesn't mean as much as you think it means. And this is the reality of this. Show me a bunch of examples of Rava representing the spirit of being the spirit of light and peace, and her truly having this stuff impact the world in some sort of a power situation. Because Hello Future Me does this in his video. He mentions the idea a few times, and let me get one of the quotes, because I was a bit annoyed at him saying this. He says here, Rava embodying peace, light, and goodness in the world makes the Avatar feel distinctly less fallible. Of course, we know they're still fallible, but are we really worried that Korra is going to make wrong decisions when she can ask the spirit of goodness itself? I was not a fan of him phrasing it this way. One, because there's an inherent contradiction in it. He has to acknowledge that every Avatar has failed, thus proving the core point wrong. And then saying that she can never make a wrong decision because she can ask Rava is not at all how the dynamic actually works. that has never happened. There is no canon situation, as far as I'm aware, in any Avatar material where the Avatar has been restricted from doing something because Rava has spoke up to stop them because it goes against what her nature as a spirit is. Rava lets the Avatar be themselves because she understands. One of the key learnings from beginnings is that she understands from learning from Wan what being human is, why it's important, why there is more to humans than meets the eye, and why she goes from at the start of beginnings referring to Wan as human and like saying it like it's a slur almost, to devoting her entire being to being a part of the Avatar as we go forward. That's kind of the kind of issue here of that. So this point here, and notice how she is just referred to as the spirit of light and peace. You know, she is not the spirit of goodness, even if it kind of feels that way. Like that is important to note, is that this is not like good and evil. Yes, you can make an argument that peace and chaos are quote unquote, good and evil, but it is not directly presented in the material as being flat out kind of good and evil. Like it's important to know that and highlight that when you add in that little extra bit, it adds more onto Rava than is actually there. Like all of her dialogue, does she always go on and on about light and peace, light and peace, light and peace? Yes, when she's explaining her nature, like how her dynamic with Rava, with Vatu works, but it's not she doesn't represent it in the same way that, like, say Wan Shi Tong. Wan Shi Tong can do more than talk about knowledge. That's sort of a concept. These spirits of something else are not just that thing. It's just kind of weird to me. And that's the point here. Like, think of Rava as a character in beginnings. She grows as a character. Like I already said, the whole calling him a human, to being willing to kind of like ease like his doubts about the world going forward as he dies. And he is the one giving her hope going into harmonic convergence. Like, what does that mean? That going into the big battle that she is destined to always take part in every 10,000 years, that the spirit of light and peace has lost hope. She doesn't think there is hope for the world going forward. Just the mere fact that this spirit of goodness is capable of feeling that, like, I can't win this one. If she was fully presented as being effectively the god of goodness, that wouldn't really be the case, but it's not the case, as we of course see. She is a all-powerful spirit. Yes, she absolutely is. This is why the Avatar is as powerful as it is that it is the fact that it allows the Avatar to have all four bending elements, but also at its core, it's coming from a power source that is one of the more powerful spirits. But the actual like impact of sort of Rava's nature or like imperative as a spirit doesn't really come completely through to Wan. Wan helps Rava because he realizes he made a mistake. And then over the course of their journey together, she realizes she made a mistake in terms of how she views humans. Because that's the point. In a way, you could say the dynamic that some people seem to want, the 50-50 dynamic, is the case when Rava and Vatu are rolling around linked together as a ball. That's what 50-50 balance in Avatar is. Two all-powerful spirits linked together, rolling around the world, destroying it as they go. Complaining about anyone who comes into their path because they're so focused on like the fight with each other and not the impact it necessarily has on a day-to-day basis on the world. That's why like Wan making the point of like, what happens basically what you're doing here affects the world, and what happens in the world affects us all because we live in this world, is a very valid point that Wan makes to Rava, that she's not infallible. And that's the point. Wan, when he meets Rava, is more or less fully developed as a character. It's Rava who more learns from Wan, and then she sort of returns the favor as Wan dies, unable to kind of bring balance to the world. But she makes it so that his spirit can go on and still try again, because she has come to realize this is such an important thing to do. That's the kind of like point in all of this. Let's get into some quotes here, some interesting ones. I get this perspective if you have a different view on what balance in Avatar is or should be, but framing it as going against Avatar, I do have an issue with, because that is not a good way to prove that point. Ultimately, because in so many examples, balance is achieved by defeating the evil, the chaotic entity. And it's just kind of the way you do storytelling. Note how it is, let me just get this here. It's peace versus chaos, not order versus chaos. If Rava was the spirit of order, you would then be like, well, okay, now you're looking at doing more of the 50-50 dynamic, because order as like a concept, you can sort of take it too far. It's, both in their own way kind of almost take freedom away from people with their kind of like nature, and going too far with this in many ways can be just as bad as going as far with this. Whereas the reality of the actual dynamic is that, going too far with peace is nothing along the lines of going too far with chaos. In terms of like the question, an era of chaos versus an era of peace. Everything that we've seen in Avatar has happened in an era of peace. And peace allows enough freedom for chaos to actually take root. As I pointed out before, an era of peace allows this to happen. This is not inherently stopped by the very nature of Rava's being from happening. This happens. The Dao Fei kind of, in a way, corruption of like the Earth Kingdom and places in Kyoshi's era is a thing that happens. Each of the villains rising up in Korra happens despite it being an era. And especially like post-book 2, despite it being like a new era of light, where you would think it would be at its most light. But that's when, in a way, the most chaotic villain of the show in the Red Lotus pops up immediately next. Which is followed by, in a way, Kuvira being the sort of like order-focused villain to a certain degree. You can interpret it that way. To kind of snuff out the kind of chaos dynamic. And it's just that idea of, peace doesn't seek to like always kind of take over. Chaos always does. And that's why it is something that does need to be kind of like, cut down. Now, I understand the point that people might want here of that means Vatu is always presented as being a chaotic, villainous entity. And the idea of like character development for him, can there even be something like that? And this is an interesting perspective going forward, given that Rava and Vatu are both inside of Korra at this point, post her defeat of Vatu. He's not gone for good, he's growing inside of Rava. Okay, what's happening in the chat? Oh, Lauren has to go. Bye. You probably catch the rest of this when it goes up as a video afterwards, but we will continue here on the live stream. Yeah, complicated topic here, definitely. I bring up this quote, which I think is quite interesting. Unalaq in K202, Southern Lights, tells Korra, "There are no evil spirits. There is light and dark in them all. But when they're unbalanced, the darkness takes over." So this is Unalaq explaining to us that balance of light and dark in spirits is a spirit's normal form. Their dark form is their unbalanced form. So their dark form, so basically the idea is that balance in a spirit is not some weird blend of like 50-50 where they're like half verging on being light, half verging on being dark. The light form is them normal, capable of doing what they want. And again, the kind of freedom in a way to have those emotions that will lead them down the path to go dark. That's the kind of point here. Whereas in so many cases, when they do go dark, something extreme has to happen to kind of get them back. And that's kind of like the dynamic we're actually going for with Avatar. And like, I get it. If you don't like that dynamic, that's fine. It's just, it's very difficult to, I think, attempt to make a point that just truly is like, well, this is why it's bad. Everyone should agree it's bad. Similarly, Iroh says some very, very similar things. If you look for the light, you can often find it. But if you look for the dark, that is all you will ever see. So again, highlighting what the dynamic for the two is again the idea of like light can often be found, but if you look for darkness, it'll always be there. It's like it's like the kind of like the easy option, and this is very similar to kind of like in a way balance in Star Wars as well. The dark side is the kind of easy path. If you let your emotions go and go then the dark, it's a kind of easy path to power. The light is harder, it's more difficult, but it can get you there as well. If they're not evil spirits, what is Vatu? Well, that's the thing, is like Vatu is not the spirit of evil, he's the spirit of chaos. Chaos doesn't have to be evil in nature, but the character of Vatu, while being that spirit, his goal seems to be to eradicate humanity by taking over the world, turning all spirits dark, and basically making it so that humans won't have a chance, effectively, in the world. And that's again the point here. We are treating these as characters that, at least Rava, we get the sense, does have the capacity to not always be about light, peace, and goodness. That she's more nuanced than just the thing she is the spirit of. So the capacity for Vatu, I think, is there. And you sort of wonder in a way of like, okay, well, he's going to be inside the Avatar for the next, couple thousand years before he maybe becomes so big that it becomes a problem for the next Avatar. But you assume he's going to be able to witness all of that, and in a maybe different way than just being inside the Tree of Time. Being there with the current Avatar and Rava as they go about their business over the generations. Will that change Vatu at all in terms of like, trying to find a different perspective on chaos? And that's an interesting dynamic to think about. Because I think even Hello Future Me in his video does bring up the idea of like, might it have been a more interesting idea if the Avatar had both spirits inside them from the beginning? Which is an interesting idea. I don't think it had to be that way or it should be that way, but now it kind of is that way. How is this going to play out going forward? We could see some interesting kind of developments on the idea of kind of like balance and kind of what it is in Avatar. Other point here. The spirit combined with the Avatar being a good spirit takes away some of the complexity from Avatar because, the Avatar is basically always going to do good. They can't ever go against this imperative because Rava is the spirit of basically good. This point obviously is countered by this. All avatars make mistakes. Some of them quite bad. Like, some of them to the point where you kind of consider them a failure to a certain degree during their era. In a very different way than, say, Wan considers himself a failure when he dies, unable to bring peace. But some of the avatars who seem somewhat ineffective in their era, would Rava not have prevented that from ever happening? But the idea ultimately is that Rava doesn't overly seek to influence the life of the Avatar. look at Karuk and what happened with him. If Rava was going to intervene at some point, you assume it would have happened with a character like Karuk. You assume it might have maybe even happened for someone like Kyoshi even. At like a key moment, like Roku making his decision to spare Sozin, would she not have come out and made some sort of a decision? And the idea is that no, she doesn't. She fundamentally lets each of these avatars make their own decisions, even if they are a mistake. She lets basically she lets Aang run away and be in the ice for all that time. She doesn't. She saves his, basically defense mechanism avatar state, effectively Rava saves him from dying in that moment, but seems okay with the idea that like Aang is allowed to run away and potentially not play his role as the avatar. These things are allowed to happen. And this is the point I was saying. This is where I actually have it written down. Really, people really over-exaggerate what Rava being the spirit of light and peace actually means. Beyond her opposing Vatu, she's not a character who only ever talks about these things or is fundamentally on a core level always guided by these principles. She explains a lot of things to Wan, but they also have kind of character moments where she talks initially about how annoyed she is about having to work with a human, but she eventually comes to see the nobility of him and the potential that they have. The avatar is different in each life and is purposefully not guided down a path by Rava. And we basically know this because of this. So this is from Escape from the Spirit World again, but this is Escape from the Spirit World 4, the Yang Chen bit at the end. So Aang's, what he says to Yang Chen is like what he learned from this whole experience. I realized no avatar is perfect. They all struggled and made mistakes, like me. Very wise. But it made me wonder, why is the avatar spirit a human in every life? Wouldn't it be better if the avatar was an all-powerful spirit that never died? Yang Chen says, I don't think so. The avatar must be compassionate towards all people, and the only way to do that is to live with them. The avatar must experience sadness, anger, joy, and happiness. By feeling all these emotions, it helps you to understand how precious human life is, so you will always do anything to protect it. If you were an all-powerful spirit living on top of some mountain, you wouldn't have so much in common with an ordinary person. So the avatar continues to take human rebirth, and with each life learns what it means to be human. And there you go. If Rava forced the avatar to always be good, it would go against that very nature of things. And that's why I find it weird that some people try to still frame what Beginnings does as working against this. Because you have to half acknowledge that like every avatar before Korra has made mistakes. Even Korra makes mistakes. She still quote unquote makes mistakes in the aftermath of book 2. That's the problem. Overall. So there's that point as well. And then there's some good points being made in chat here as well. That Beginnings emphasized that it was Wan's nature to always do good before meeting Rava, but Rava gave kind of power and a kind of sense of duty. Also talk about the Yang Chen book at the end. Yang Chen wished she was a lonely spirit, but changed her mind when they found the boy. The Yang Chen book actually is quite interesting on this topic as well, given that she is the one to say this. She also is the one to most heavily kind of point out the idea of like, I talked to like all of my past lives, and every single one of them had regrets. None of them felt that they were the avatar in a golden era or anything like that. They all had something that they wish they could change. That doesn't seem like it would be the case if they were forced to always do good by the nature of the spirit that they contain within them. And that's the problem here. Everything contradicts this kind of view of the avatar being forced to be good. The point about sort of Wan's nature I do think is quite interesting, is that like, yes, you would almost say that more so than Rava being the spirit of light, it is who Wan was at his core as a person that is more of the reason why we'll never get like an evil light avatar. Is that, can you imagine any reincarnation of Wan that in any way sticks to the fundamentals of who he was as a person that could ever just be out and out evil? Now, we don't really know the full nature of reincarnation. A lot of the avatars are very different, and we know that there are only sort of like almost like small key fundamental things that are kind of similar across the avatars as we go through the cycle. But I would say it's more on the who the spirit being reincarnated is. That's more of where you see the lack of willingness to be evil kind of come from. Because like that's what Tenzin says to kind of Korra at the end, is that, you know, Wan kind of, when he merged with Rava, that's when he like truly became the Avatar. But he already kind of represented everything that it was to be the Avatar prior to that. Because he is someone who left the Line Turtle and actually forged a relationship with multiple spirits. They accepted him. He, as a character, represents a sort of balance between humans and spirits, because he was able to make spirits accept a human, and he treats spirits as being actually friends. And this was all prior to the Rava stuff actually happening. And in terms of a character who represented like balance between the two, it was Wan more than Rava who would represent that balance, because of course Rava was kind of borderline anti-human, as we saw presented. So that's a very, very interesting thing to me as well, overall. So I think that's most of these points here. Let me go back up here to this. Did we go through all these? Yeah, we went over that. Yes. So, yeah, there's maybe some other stuff we need to get into, but like, is there any other counter criticisms we need to cover before we just start getting into more general like lore topics? Is, I suppose, the final thing to do before we kind of move on overall. So there's that. What do I have here at the bottom? That. Do I have anything in this that I want to mention? Yeah, because when I was preparing for this, I was like, should I have like a giant document with just like a ton of text? Because I wrote an initial document where I was typing a lot. Like I think I ended up having like 5,000 words or something like that. But then I realized that I want this to be more of a kind of slightly more interactive with the chat and less just kind of reading what I've written here on the page. So I ultimately did this more kind of pared down kind of document versus like the initial one where I just kind of went all out writing like an essay type thing. But anyway, let's get into some of the other things in Avatar. So I want to talk about the kind of in a way challenge of beginnings, of just like you know the uniqueness of the Avatar and making it work so that like in a way it can't really be replicated, because this is the challenge here. You want to, in a lore focused kind of like origin story type thing, create an explanation that works and like fits, but also that doesn't allow it so that you can have so many more avatars. So they answer a lot of these questions in my mind really, really nicely. So straight away, the spirit, there are only two all-powerful spirits. So it can only be Rava or Vatu. And that was the entire plot of book 2 in a way, is that a attempt almost to replicate the Avatar, to have a chance on the other side of things in the fight at harmonic convergence, is what like Unalaq does. But interestingly, even the Dark Avatar is not a complete copy of the actual Avatar, because the Dark Avatar only is a waterbender, because Unalaq has waterbending. And that's the key point here, is like the way they did the bending explanation was very clever, in that, you know, it requires line turtles, multiple line turtles as well. And because they wrote it that the line turtles left the world when the Avatar kind of came into being and was actually going to have an impact on the world, it took this out of the picture. So there was no real way to sort of collect other elements to, in a way, give to Vatu, so that the Dark Avatar could even have anything. And that's what's kind of very interesting about that, is that borderline, like, there doesn't even appear to be any particular mechanism to sort of, you know, do this, like force a potential next Dark Avatar to even have the other elements. Like, you can maybe think of stuff like, say, like the Hundun kind of thing, of like extracting chi from the Dantian. Can you do that and also take the power of an element with it? But I'm not sure about that, because that's chi extraction, and as far as we're aware, the power of an element, which is what makes someone a bender, is not necessarily chi. We don't really know what exactly it is at its core, so that might not even extract that. So the real thing that kind of prevents, you know, the other elements is, you know, there aren't other line turtles. And even if there was another line turtle, like, it might not be the one of the right element. Like, if Unalaq met a line turtle, what if it was the water one? Then he's already like done, and that's the thing. It's so, that's what's so interesting. There's no way to give those other three elements to like Vatu or have anyone get it, because the line turtles aren't around. So that was the real kind of clever thing here, of like spirit combination with Rava plus the unique way in which the bending was got. But then, like, also, like, linking into that other point that I was making from before, that I want to talk about as well, which is this. The heavy expansion on this concept, I think, is also one of the best parts of Beginnings on a more technical level, is what's so interesting, that we get the idea that, you know, when a spirit goes inside of a human, there's kind of two things that happen. If the spirit has a unique physical form, it will begin to change the human to become like their form. The second thing is just the energy aspect, and that is that spirits are basically spirit energy beings. So when they go inside of a human, they're effectively pumping a ton of energy into that human. And they present the idea that humans basically can like overload on energy. You can kill a human by staying in them too long. And we see this idea with Rava in particular, and also the idea that Rava doesn't morph Wan because she is just a spirit of light. In terms of her physical being, she just is light. So the idea would be that the only way she can properly like morph Wan will be to do basically what Vatu does to Unalaq in turning into Unavatu, which is effectively kind of destroy his body, but incorporate the kind of physical aspects of him into his own being, so that he is still like a bender and still has the power of the human spirit dynamic that makes, you know, the combination quite powerful. That's very, very cool overall. To me anyway, in terms of more technical thing, they didn't need to go into in terms of this depth, but I like that explanation of Juan explaining that, you know, the way that the elements get swapped for him to like train with them initially is Rava passes through him, which kind of expands Juan's kind of like energy in his body, but also swaps out the elements. And because this is happening so regularly, he's becoming more and more accustomed to it. His body is becoming more of a container for energy, which eventually allows him to do the sort of like proto-avatar state before the merging even happens. But he's still limited because he can't hold 4 elements plus a powerful spirit inside of him for that long. And it's such an impressive feat that he was actually able to do it for a couple of seconds even, and show us that little kind of proto-avatar state thing. That was very interesting overall. And this is so useful going forward for stuff like, say, Tokuga, and understanding him in Turf Wars. It's so useful for like a Yoon in the Kyoshi novels, of understanding that idea of like there are a few different ways that you can sort of combine the energies of a human and a spirit. The kind of pass-through method, staying in them for a little bit of time, can leave a certain level of kind of power, ability in a way within someone's body, and that's what happened to Tokuga. He's enhanced in that way. But then there's the Yoon example where instead of, you know, the idea like, oh, he just merges with Glowworm, because Glowworm even says that what he was basically going to do if Yoon had gone through with the deal was that he was going to basically like pass through Yoon and like give him like a little bit of his power. But instead Yoon like defeats him and consumes him. So he's sort of like, you know, contains his energy down to an amount that like Yoon actually can control, eats him, and it's this idea he has consumed a certain amount of Glowworm energy and becomes this like enhanced being. And he seems to have probably some of the most equivalent, like something the most equivalent to like avatar state levels of bending for like another bender, beyond the Dark Avatar, in how powerful at earthbending he is. And all of this comes from, like, I think, just a nice explanation of this idea of energy limits on the body. That even if like someone meets another line turtle, if they're already a bender of one element, unless they have one of the all-powerful spirits, they can't swap really the elements out. And it's just that, like, this is why things work this way. This also helps us with situations like people often go, oh, what if the avatar had a twin? What if they did twin avatars and like the spirit was split between them? And it's like, well, that's not how it works, because the avatar, like Rava, is going to be reborn in one person. And even splitting the elements up doesn't particularly make a lot of sense, because they can only be contained by the person who is the avatar, who has that much, you know, capacity for holding energy in their body. That's the key point that I quite like. What's this in chat? It was established in Avatar that the mountain line turtles didn't bend the elements before the Avatar, so them giving one firebending doesn't connect. Like, this is a point here. Like, the line turtle says, in the era before the Avatar. And keeping in mind what we're dealing with in beginnings is like literally like 2 years prior to that era changing over. So in the passage of time that we're talking about here, like, are we really going to like mince words here and split hairs over the idea that, like, well, technically some bending was being done before the Avatar came into being in this very specific way, with line turtles giving and then taking the power away? The point is that humans were not benders as such in the same way as we know them in the modern era, back during that time. And that's the kind of point that's being made, that this is the story of like how that actually came to be. So there's that. Harmonic convergence. I suppose we probably should talk about harmonic convergence. Some people don't like it. I don't have a problem with it. Like, we're all happy with the idea that, oh yeah, Sozin's Comet comes every 100 years. that's a thing that we can do. But we have a problem with like a kind of planetary alignment spiritual event every 10,000 years. I maybe understand a little bit of some of it where like, for instance, like I sort of understand the idea that people might have a bit of an issue with the idea that harmonic convergence gives people the like, it gives the bending to the new airbenders, without like really explaining all that much. Like I can accept it to a certain degree because I think the clue is kind of in the name, that this is the event that happens that determines the balance of the world in a way, and here's a way to bring harmony back into the world. And it kind of, it implies like some interesting things about like, how you can give people elements and so on. It's a little bit like, I wish there was a little bit more explanation to it. But the core, a lot of the stuff they do with harmonic convergence, I don't really have too much of a problem with, because it makes it so that in history you always have this event to come back to. In that, like, the next harmonic convergence is going to be fascinating because it'll be the first one where like we'll have the battle between, light and dark, when like Vatu is within the avatar basically. And how's that going to work? But then you also have some really interesting things of like, again, because they told us how it worked, the avatar, like during that era, if the information is kept alive, you can stop harmonic convergence, like the fight aspect of it, from happening. If you just temporarily seal the portals just prior to the event happening, you can, skip the need for the battle and continue the era that you're in. But that's what makes the idea of like Vatu, I suppose, getting close to the event would be sort of like almost 50-50 in terms of the same size as a Rava, and would be probably trying to influence his way out. So how's that going to work? That's a more interesting idea overall. And then I forgot the first part as well. Like the spirit world mechanic stuff, I think is fantastic. Like I said at the start, the avatar vagueness when they introduced this stuff in the spirit world episode was not helpful. The idea that this is Aang separating his spirit from his body, but it's still being in the physical world, was not a good way to explain the spirit world to people. And especially like they later will like allude to the idea that like Sokka has been to the spirit world, but we never followed him in there. It's just Heibai took him there for a while and then we saw him come back out. Whereas Aang had this whole adventure just as a spirit in the physical world. And, that's a kind of almost needlessly complicated way to introduce it. And as we went forward, we got more of the idea that, Aang can meditate to go into the spirit world, that this is something that can be done, which obviously implies, this is how Iroh, I suppose, effectively got there. You would assume it's something along those lines. And so just the simple thing of, you can't bend when you're a spirit, and this applies across the board with the two worlds. If you get to the spirit world, body and spirit, you can bend, because you're, bending as a physical art requires your body to actually do the bending, so you can actually bend while you're in there. Whereas if you do the typical meditation thing, you can't. And I think that's nice. That the clarification that they did with that was, I think, really important to establish that that's how it can work. In the same way that spirits can come into the physical world and actually have somewhat of a physical form, humans are actually capable in some ways of going into the physical world, into the spirit world, in a physical form. And I like that they're creating, in a way, the balance of like both sides can meet each other kind of on their own terms. And I like that that's actually possible. Similarly, stuff like, revealing like through Iroh, he's stayed as a spirit in the spirit world. I like that if you're spiritual enough, you can leave your body behind, let it die, but that doesn't kill your actual spirit and reincarnate. You can choose to remain there and eventually become a spirit. And that I would like to maybe learn a little bit more about, like how exactly that works and how long it would take for like Iroh to change enough to where he maybe looks more like an actual spirit. Like, is Iroh always going to be this human-like spirit, or will he eventually, change form and become something different? That's an interesting topic, because like the Painted Lady, for instance, it more just looks kind of almost like a glowing human. There's not too much fancy stuff going on there, and that's like an interesting one to me. Like, do they need to give me a full-on explanation of exactly how that works and the timing and stuff like that? No, not necessarily, but just something I think it will be interesting to see. Just like if they even came up with some sort of a design where, like, in 10,000 years, Iroh will look like this in the spirit world. That will be an interesting kind of like concept to explore. And then again, this is especially important in the current era, now that we have 3 spirit portals and one in like the biggest kind of city in the world, effectively, Republic City. It's so important that you address and have people be able to know when bending is possible, when bending isn't possible, and cover those ideas. That's, I think, an important thing as well. So there is that. So, I suppose, are there any other topics, kind of lore focused, or kind of, I suppose, maybe even, is this the time to open it up more generally, that people would like to see get discussed? This is the time to present it. I have a feeling this stream probably won't go as long as other streams. Like, we're just about approaching the 2-hour point at this stage. A lot of my recent streams have been 3 hours. I don't think this one will go 3 hours. But I still want to spend a little bit more time here just discussing some stuff. So let's see what's in chat there. I think he'll become like a slightly less human over time, like into a more exaggerated parody version of himself, physically speaking. Yeah, that would be interesting, for sure, to see what happens. Like, you almost are kind of like, oh, like, do they have to develop like different properties? Like, if he slowly morphed and maybe became a little bit more like dragon-like, is that something that would fit because of the type of character he is? I'm not really sure, but there's some cool stuff like that. Let's see. I've seen a lot of people say that beginnings airbenders were stronger because they didn't have any earthly attachments, like Bison. This is so wrong, since they literally lived in family units. Yes, that is a very interesting thing about the original airbenders as presented there, is that, yes, the Bison weren't there, but they clearly, compared to modern air nomads, did live in more kind of concrete sort of like family units. There wasn't the sort of male-female like separation completely. Now, it still could have been somewhat of a kind of communal thing. We're not entirely sure about that. But at the very least, it doesn't seem like all of their kind of cultural aspects had like formed at that time. The reason I suppose people say that they're stronger is because they have that somewhat unique airbending skill of the flying on the kind of cloud thing. Now, maybe it's the art style of beginnings that is like, is it just flying on air type thing, or what? I think it's meant to be more of the idea they actually do. It's meant to be the kind of Dragon Ball kind of style, like flying Nimbus thing, that they literally do that. It's a very clever application of bending, and you wonder, like, why isn't that really used? I'm guessing overall it's because it is just a gliding type thing. I assume that like it allows you a certain level of quote unquote flight, but obviously not in the same way of the actual airbending ability of flight, which is basically what the Sky Bisons have, just being able to float at will. That's not what the cloud ability is. So at least my take on it is probably just that the incorporation of like the actual objects of the gliders into like part of their culture probably meant that skill went a little bit perhaps out the window, because they probably had better control over gliding / flying using airbending in combination with the glider than they maybe did constantly having to airbend a specific cloud to keep them up. And if they just ran out of energy, they're gone, because they can barely save themselves after that point. Whereas at least with the glider, if you stop airbending, you're still gliding. because it's still, got the whole aerodynamic stuff going on. But still, you can say it's a bit of a lost skill. It could be something quite useful to reincorporate back into things. But you have stuff like, say, like the air scooter kind of is the Tenzin's air cycle, are similar abilities to that are, somewhat similar to that. So it's an interesting point, is that, like, culturally, obviously we mainly focus on sort of the early firebenders, and even then, because of the interesting point here, I'll actually bring this one up. I'll probably just type this one out here. Yeah. Dozens of line turtles. This was a huge point here, because one goes to see one of each, but it obviously implies that there are so many more line turtles out there, which leaves the door open in terms of some of this more historical parts of the culture of each of the nations. Of, like, okay, we saw what looked like the birth of the Fire Nation when Jaya and his group sort of left the line turtle, kind of following in Wan's footsteps. And, to a certain degree, like, sure, that is where at least some section of the Fire Nation kind of, I guess, come from to a certain degree. But there are at least a couple more fire line turtles out there at different points on the map. And we assume they were also protecting a human group there. And the idea seems to be that that is probably where your Sun Warriors perhaps come from. Your Bonte tribe might come from one or the others. And, you get that sort of sense where, like, different parts of the culture come from different ones like that. Like, is there something interesting about the fact that, like, Wan got earthbending from, like, the kind of desert line turtle? Like, does that maybe say something about it? It's interesting for sure. Like, even just something set a little bit before beginnings, I think would be kind of fascinating by itself, just to maybe a little bit more understand, like, how long this has been going on. Like, I don't think we really have much of a foundation, but, like, for you guys in chat, like, I suppose we're talking about, like, an era of the line turtles protecting humanity, but, like, how long do you think, like, people lived in line turtle cities like that? This is what's so difficult to kind of, like, think about in a way, because obviously the idea is that eventually, like, because of Rava and Vatu, more Vatu, he obviously ripped open the barrier between worlds. This is what allowed kind of spirits to come through into the physical world for the first time. A lot of these spirits are older than humanity itself, so they see the kind of physical world grow, evolve. Eventually humans kind of spring up, and what is this when the line turtles step in to protect, like, early humanity, and, like, we see it evolve using the line turtle cities? Or is it more of a kind of almost like a little bit more recent thing because of specific spirits kind of coming in? It's a very interesting idea to think about, just like more of that kind of direct setup thing. It seems like some of these kind of cultures on these line turtles have been there for kind of quite a while to, like, establish that, like, the Chews, for instance, on Wan's line turtle, this is the kind of, like, these are the high ups on this line turtle, and, like, they seem to have control over that to a certain degree. That's interesting. And then, yeah, the kind of point of, like, old ATLA website lore seems to suggest that, like, except the ATLA one. So there's that whole idea as well. I'm wondering if this is perhaps more, you're meant to view this as being more of a legend that people who know about history know about line turtles, but they're not around anymore. So what happened? I guess we must have hunted them to extinction. And maybe that's just the way it is, but they actually still are hidden wherever they actually are. That it's an interesting one, because I'd be shocked if there only was the one line turtle, like that there ever was a period of human history where just they hunted line turtles, because I think we would have seen results of that. That's one of the interesting things about line turtles, is that like they are so big, they are islands. Like you would think that like either some islands out there are literally dead line turtles and we don't know it, or we would have more proof of this. So it's interesting. Let's see. I would love to get a video one day exploring all the points on the spectrum between humans and spirits, like what's different between Yue and Iroh, and the difference between Tui and La, and say Lady Tianhai. Yeah, the classification of spirits is really, really unique, because clearly there are like categories of them where Rava Vatu are all powerful, but like, would you say Rava and Vatu, like, I suppose a better way to word this is, are Tui and La in the same category as Rava and Vatu? Or are they like slightly below that? Because those two represent the kind of two primordial forces in a way. And the like implication from like the art book in terms of the lore, kind of the theoretical lore, is that literally Rava and Vatu came into existence by like literally coming out of the Tree of Time at like the same time, at like the beginning of the world. But then it's also said that like Tui and La were around at like the beginning of the world as well, and actually took on mortal forms at a very early point also. So what exactly is going on? That is an interesting point. But yeah, Yue's in a weird spot where like she's the moon spirit. She full on, I guess, because that's the weird one there, is that like, in a way, why does Yue become the moon spirit? Because it's clearly still Yue, or is Yue actually gone, but it's Tui with just a little bit of Yue? That's a weird, from like a, you know, from a like kind of being, kind of consciousness kind of like point of view, in terms of like, okay, she only lives because of the moon spirit. Like the Yue situation is so complicated, because her life is her whole human life happened basically because of a spirit. She then gave that back to protect the spirit. So I'm guessing the idea is that the rest of Tui, quote unquote, you know, died, but because it was her part that restored it, it's now kind of part of her. It's a very complicated situation. This is where, like, I think it's one of the earlier kind of like spirit interaction things. I don't think they fully fleshed it out. I think you just have to accept what's going on with that as being a bit of a weird point. Because even then you get into the sort of more complicated lore of like, okay, Tui is the moon spirit. It is represented by this fish, but it is this really, really, really powerful spirit. It has a connection to the celestial object that is the moon, this giant rock up there that like is right next to the avatar Earth. When it dies, it alters how that moon impacts water on the planet. Like, what's going on here ultimately? Like, is it just that there is some sort of a spiritual link? Because it gets confusing, because like harmonic convergence has a spiritual effect because it's the planets like aligning, and then here is a spirit that is effectively linked with that object. What's going on here? It's very, very confusing. Let's see. Okay, one ability in Avatar that confuses me is the spiritual finding people with the vines ability, because Guru Patik is able to use it. Was it an earthbending subset or what? In that case, I think it is just that people who are very spiritual are able to use those spirit vines, because in this case, what it means is it is not a bending ability, but it is just a thing that you're able to interact with properly if you are someone who is spiritual in nature. That sort of thing. That it doesn't require bending, as far as I'm aware, in any way, because it is a purely kind of spiritual type thing. It's sort of the idea that like it's literally the tree kind of like linking you with the very like essence of people, through the whole everything is connected in the swamp type situation. Guru Patik as like this kind of enlightened character, I assume you have to be on that like really deep level. So like the Avatar is capable of doing it. Guru Patik is able to do it. I wonder, is Hugh able to do it? Because he says he achieved enlightenment under the banyan tree. So I assume he would be able to do it as well. There's that. What's this? Benders become stronger when bonding with a spirit. Yes. But what happens to a non-bender? That's how I thought of Yue. Yeah, like that is an interesting one there, because this is a weird one where like Yue gets like a small amount of Twee's power, and almost it's like enough to spark her into life, but it doesn't seem to inherently grant her any like skills, because she's obviously not a bender, which you'd almost think that if any spirit could give you their energy and it would make you a bender, you would think it would be the moon spirit, because of the whole like it not existing turns off water bending connection point. But yeah, it's a weird one, all right. But at least with Twee, there's the whole like healing connection, which I do kind of like. The idea that the water that the fish swim around in is the spirit oasis, and that water has effectively it's like physical water that's been turned into basically spirit water just by interaction with a spirit. Because obviously when we see I think it's Kaya heals Mako and Bolin in the spirit world by just putting them in like a random pool of water, and it's spirit water. It has the same sort of like instant healing property. So that's a kind of like interesting point, and that's again the kind of water bending connection with healing. And then healing seems to be a trait that Twee has, because Twee was able to kind of revive Yue with what happened to her. But it's interesting for sure, like all of that stuff. So yeah, lots of super interesting lore topics that come up. So yeah, like I suppose we're getting to the point where we're probably running out of topics here. So it probably won't be, the stream won't be like too much longer here. Like I said, I've been saying this in all my streams here, I'm planning to do at least one stream a month. So there will be an April stream. I'm hoping at that point we'll probably have the Yang Chen Book 2 announced. So at least it can be focused on that to a certain degree. So it might be like some more Yang Chen speculation, depending on how much information we get. Like I assume we'll get the cover, the book description, release date, and I think that should be enough to have a reasonable discussion depending on what happens. Otherwise, it might be I might put out a call at some point to see what topics people would like to see discussed as like a full-on stream topic. But that's what what we're trying to do here. We'll just discuss what we can. So this one was kind of like pretty fun. Like obviously, like lore, it's a very technical topic when you really want to get into it, but there's some interesting things that come up. I understand it's probably not like everyone's favorite kind of like topic to discuss. Like I'd love to be doing a little bit more speculation on like the upcoming Avatar projects, but like we just don't know enough about them at this point. Like it's cool that we're beginning to get stuff like the recent news that I still have to cover it in a news video that Avatar News put out. The idea that like the Kyoshi characters are apparently going to be in the first ATLA movie, though I think it could also be the think the news was more that it could actually be the first show as well. But at least for me, like I'm leaning in the direction of it probably will be the ATLA movie, based on the fact that casting for both seems to be going on at like basically the same time. That was, I think, the news from yesterday, was that they're looking for casting for like Kyoshi, Rangi, Yoon, and Heiran, as well as their Katara, Sokka, Aang, and so on. So that to me feels like, you know, those two are probably linking up, and that's what's going on there. But again, even that's like a very vague speculation. But other than that, like, we are just waiting for news. Like, all this vague news, like as much as it feels like almost every month we get some sort of a rumor or information about the upcoming project, it all eventually adds up to like not that much. Like, we have 2 potential titles for this first movie. We have casting news. This character might be in this project. We know about all these projects, but fundamentally it's still not enough to properly get excited about. Like, we still have no visuals with like anything at all. I wish we just had something. Waiting for all these like official announcements and like, when are they going to come from? I said it many times before, but like, you know, we obviously didn't get an investors event for February. So now we think of like SDCC in July and NYCC in October. This is also basically like, you know, 2 years to the movie exactly. And I think this is a key point. By this point, I feel, especially because we're doing like, you know, it's like, what am I trying to say here? Not just one project, because it is a full-on studio slate. We should know more ahead of time. Like, to me, that's the kind of logic I'm going with. That like, if it was just one project, you can maybe expect that, like, yeah, they might wait until probably a year, maybe a year and a half out to finally tell us something. But because they are talking about all these multiple projects and they're trying to make Avatar something big, I think they need to make the studio announcement a little kind of clearer and more ahead of time. And I think this year, I don't know, I get the impression that like, if we go through these events and we don't get anything, this will be a key point in terms of just like, what are we doing? Because what I don't think we want to happen is, we don't want Avatar Studios to be treated the same way as the live action show information, where we're theoretically a couple of months away from the airing of the live action show, and we have still seen like nothing. We still basically know very little about it. Like, from almost like a plot perspective, like what's really going to be about, we almost know more about Avatar Studios stuff than the Netflix show. That's how like secretive that has been. I hope with Avatar Studios they're not trying to do that, and once they solidify some of their plans, which hopefully by the end of the year we have, this will be the case. Because I think about, like, say, Korra, and like, we had Korra information like 2 years, a year and a half before it actually came out. Now, there was, I think, one delay that we, I think, officially knew about for Korra that happened, because it was originally, I think, meant to be like, what was it, mid to late 2011 or something like that, I think was the original schedule for it when we heard about it in like 2010, but then it got delayed into April 2012. But like, so, you know, we're getting to the range like 2 years where I feel like, yeah, we're gonna need to know something about it, because otherwise now it seems like the February kind of like reveal events isn't really a thing anymore. So I don't think that's on the table for anything in particular. And beyond that, we're just waiting for like stuff to happen. Like, we are obviously waiting for the Azula comic to release. That's still going to be quite a while away. Like, you know, right in the middle of the 2 Comic-Cons. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at from like a fandom perspective at that point, if they reveal anything here. July should be hopefully when Yanchen Book 2 actually releases. So we should at least hopefully have something quite exciting out at this point. But then you get into the idea with that as well. I want them to obviously announce the Yanchen Book 2, but like I also want to know like what's next. What's next for the novels? Because we don't have a roadmap for them either. And apart from the fact that we roughly know what like the Korra comic schedule is, we actually don't know what the next Avatar comic is. So you're looking for sort of like a kind of what am I saying here? Publishing roadmap. Like we've never had a publishing roadmap ever. It's always just been one at a time. I think now would be a nice time to know what's happening, because there is a sense I think that like FCE is not just going to do Avatar books like one after the other forever. We're eventually, for the novels, I think, going to have to get in another writer at some point. So is that going to happen on the next series or the one after that? And then what Avatar are we doing next for Chronicles of the Avatar? I think for most people it probably has to be a Roku or Zito. And if it is either of those two, you assume FCE might do it. If it's anyone else, they might bring in a different writer to do one of the more sort of like unknown avatars. But we're still just waiting to see what happens here. And that's the big point with, like, say, it's probably more in the release. Like when we get to July, maybe the book comes out. Will we get an interview suggesting what the future of the novels is, or will we not? Same goes for like post Azula comic. What is the Avatar comic after that? They really haven't said much, like at all. Where's Beast of the Four Nations? I say once again. Lots of issues like that sort of across the board as a fandom. And look, like there's stuff I'm excited for. Like, of course, Avatar Weiss Schwartz is something I am incredibly excited for. I'm like checking the website every day just to see if they're kind of sneakily putting up any cards. None yet, but really excited for that stuff to come out. So that should be pretty fun. But yeah, we're beyond that. It's just waiting for stuff like oh my god, I've even forgot the name of it. The other video game, Quest for Balance. Quest for Balance is going to be, I guess, something we hear about later in the year. That could be exciting, could not be exciting. We have to wait and see what it is. But we are just slowly getting towards Avatar Studios, but we are still a long way away. Still a long way away from Avatar Studios for sure. But I do hope we get back to them, because I'm just so excited to get back to stuff like, waiting for that movie to come out, being so excited when the trailer drops. That's going to be such an exciting time when we first see character designs, we see that first trailer, and then when it comes out, just talking about it online with people. Because like, I remember how excited like I was when these episodes hit, because this is my thing, Avatar lore. This was the episode where they went into it, like Line Turtle content. This was incredible. I'm so excited to get back to that. And I'm really interested to see how things go this time out, because yes, we're getting all this expansion, but I'm also worried that the new project will just be another thing that sort of further divides the fan base, because I think that's just how stuff goes in fandoms these days, is that, for everyone, there'll always be some piece of content they view as being, it was good up to this point, and then it went off the rails after that point. It just seems to happen with everything, and it's already, to a degree, happened with Korra, and now it's happening, like, potentially again. But because the first movie is going to be ATLA, I am so eager to see what happens, because people are going to come back. There's going to be a huge nostalgia sense with this movie when we get to it, because it's going to be like what? It's going to be 20 years. It's going to be the 20-year anniversary of the start of ATLA, and the 17-year anniversary of the ending of ATLA. That's huge. Like, just any fan of Avatar, like, just the fact that everyone is like 20 to 17 years old, or whatever way you want to look at it, from if they were like alive when Avatar first aired, and so on. Like that's a massive kind of crazy thing. Like there's going to be so much hype about that, and I want to see that get started, because they can start that whenever they want. Like, can you imagine just they do a thing where they just release Aang's design, 24-year-old Aang's design, and they're like, next month we will give you Korra. Like literally, it's an exact month countdown to a day. So you're going to get Katara's design. Next month you're going to get Sokka's design. That would be such a cool thing to go through the months, because you see how people like go crazy online about like new pieces of stock imagery. Like you could see the Appa display that I have over here. Like I basically alerted people to the fact that this was up. People were like freaking out because like, oh wow, new Appa image and some new Katara stuff and so on. Now imagine that was like the new design for Katara, the new Toph design, stuff like that people are so eager to see. That's going to be so huge for the fandom, absolutely. Because there's so much riding on that, because like the old friends poster gets brought up so much, but like we're talking about a slightly different era for the characters than even them. So that's the kind of thing there. I wish I was part of the online fandom back in the day. Yeah, it depends what you're talking about as well, because like there's were you part of the ATLA fandom, or was it the while Korra was airing fandom that you're talking about? Because they're both kind of like very different things, and especially like now that we're going into like an era where we've no like big official Avatar forum. Like there, like at least during ATLA there was like the Nickelodeon message boards and stuff like that. We don't even have that anymore. They have a lot of work to do to get us back to a point, because like the fear in a way that you have for maybe Avatar, the new stuff, is just that it is going to be all stuff that is completely in like the social media kind of era of things, and like you see how Twitter like makes so many discussions go all over the place because of like the character limit and just the general attitude that like it seems like you almost have to have on Twitter to get the interactions and likes and stuff like that. It doesn't maybe make for the best like in-depth discussion that say old message boards, old forums actually did have. Because for me, I would say like my favorite kind of period of time for the fandom was, I'd say 2011 to 2012. Why did I type it like that? 2012. The year building up to Korra, and then basically the airing of season 1 of Korra, was like, I think the most hyped I've ever been as an Avatar fan. Watching those episodes as they aired, even though I had to watch like live streams of like basically Americans like airing the episodes, because they of course never aired them in Ireland on the same day, that was incredibly exciting. And just the excitement as each new episode came out, and especially because book 1 of Korra has like mysteries, like the whole Amon thing when the bloodbending stuff happened, like people were freaking out. That was incredibly exciting. Obviously there was a gap between book 1 and book 2. That's when some of the sort of the negativity started to come in, and then that combined with sort of how Nick began to treat sort of Korra, and then they sort of took it off the air. They changed it to online airing most of the episodes before it went on TV. And from a fandom perspective, it was still very exciting, of course, but they didn't help things, certainly, during that time. Really didn't help things, yeah. Never forgetting the Aang is Amon era. Oh yeah, the crazy stuff going around there, because that was in a way such a well-made fake of the elderly Aang under the mask of Amon image, and people thinking that, oh my god, this is like leaked information for a second, but then realizing that, like, wait, this actually doesn't make a lot of sense. But that was fun because there was so much speculation right up until the end about, like, wait, who or what is Amon? What are they going to do with this? And that was really, really strong, because in a way, like, there wasn't that many more kind of like almost like mysteries after that in Avatar. There's a few that they set up, but I never felt like they were as interesting as some of those book 1 mysteries, where, like, yeah, book 2 you wonder how it's going to work out. Book 3 you presented a bit of a mystery about, like, oh, why is this group after Korra? Who are they? But the reveal, like, was like, okay, that's fine. Like, it's not a shocking reveal. The early book 4 stuff was interesting because we were kind of like, whoa, why is Korra, like, wearing, like, Earth Kingdom clothes, and, like, why is her hair different, and, like, what's going on here? And as, like, episode 1 and 2 aired, you're like, oh, whoa, she's separate from everyone, and that kind of, like, the recovery arc in book 4 was, like, kind of quite shocking when it initially happened. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, this was kind of like the unmatched era in a way, because even the ending of ATLA era in the fandom was weird because it was very characterized by the whole, hashtag shipping wars situation that was like a big thing in the fandom. And in a way, like, they leaned into this a little bit too much perhaps during Korra to manufacture their own shipping war thing instead of just kind of letting it happen on its own. But there's always that weirdness in fandom with everything that happens. There's always some sort of odd stuff that ends up happening. So yeah, I'm just excited to get back to that point, because if you think about it, like, the whole, like, the era that we've, like, had for Avatar right now, which is, I suppose, basically 2015, and it's going to be up until, like, I don't know, let's say 2024, we finally start to get proper information. Like, this is the sort of, like, the publishing era where, like, all we had was, like, comics, later novels, and, like, merchandise and stuff like this. This is the kind of, like, the rough era where, like, we had to survive in a way as a fandom just off, like, small amounts of stuff. And it's interesting to reflect on that, kind of how long in a way it's been with all of this stuff and how it happened. That most of Avatar's, like, run has actually been, like, post, like, the second show in a way. And when we finally do get there, it's very interesting to highlight that, we had a couple of years where we were on, but, like, so many years where we just actually didn't have anything. So the return needs to be big, and, like, when they finally do start to talk about it, it needs to be big, it needs to be notable, for sure. But yeah, it was a pretty good discussion. So yeah, I suppose, like, this is sort of the final call for any last minute topics here to discuss before we end the stream here. And then, yeah, like I said, yeah, there will be a stream in April, so I try and hit the one stream a month situation. In terms of videos, I suppose coming, I probably will put up a video tomorrow. Wait, will it be tomorrow? No, sorry, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Sunday. Sunday will be the Boruto video, of course. Important anime episode. Monday, I will either do my Boruto chapter speculation video or a news video covering the recent, like, Kyoshi kind of, like, casting news that Avatar News put up. And then beyond that, it's just kind of waiting for stuff to happen. This is the kind of rough part of this, is that there are weeks where there'll be news and it's just like, oh, I have, like, 3 news videos to do this week. But then there'll be weeks when it's like, I don't think I have an Avatar video to do this week. because I've discussed so much stuff. I don't often have just a, and this will be the week I do that topic I've never discussed before, because I've discussed so much stuff. I don't often have that. So, it's just waiting for like updates on things, and maybe I get the burst of inspiration, and like I realize, actually there's this to talk about as well. But that's just where we're at right now as a fandom. We're still 2 months away, roughly just under 2 months from Free Comic Book Day. That at least will have something in it. But I think one of the biggest things that's very defining right now of this is let me just try and find this. The fact that this comic is still not fully out yet, I think is such a crazy thing to me. That like, I've had it for like a while, because obviously I got a review copy. But the fact that like we're still like pretty much like a full month from the final release of this book, and it finally coming out, when I can finally stop talking about it, is just the craziest thing in the world to me. That this comic that was announced in like 2021 has taken all this time and is still not out yet, is just the wildest situation in the world to me. But like, at least like there's other stuff like this book should be a little bit of fun when it comes out, even though it's only a few pages. But like, to see the rest of the art, because already some of it is quite nice, is pretty cool. Not too much to say about these, but for the collection, pretty nice. Keep an eye out. Probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll actually start to see the pictures of what the 2024 calendar is going to be like. And remember, with this thing, they're going for comics this time out. Vivid illustrations from the Dark Horse comics. So they're going for a comic one. So that's an interesting one. And then, always forgotten in all of this, remember The Rise of Kyoshi in paperback. 2024. It's been like this for like what, 4 years? It's been a really long time since we've known about paperbacks for the Kyoshi books. But they're basically, I think, both scheduled for this day in 2024. I just find that crazy. But these will be the first editions of the books that actually say Chronicles of the Avatar Book 1, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, but that is the situation that we're in. But you'll also notice that, like, on this website at least, the Azula comic isn't up here yet. It's also not up on the Dark Horse website, so there's even some weirdness about that, where like they've technically, like, it's fully announced. You can purchase it and it's up for pre-order and stuff like that, but it hasn't appeared in comic solicitations yet. Dark Horse, they don't have it listed on their website yet. Previews World don't have it yet. So there's some weirdness here, as we're getting into, like, I guess, an era where they're actually like announcing these books like officially ahead of the proper full reveal of everything, which is interesting. But that's really all there is to kind of say about this stuff. Like, I don't really know where we kind of stand on a lot of this stuff. Obviously, like, Beast of the Four Nations isn't here. Don't know what to make of that. It's just a confusing situation across the board with publishing. Hopefully this year gets us back on track, but for instance, like the Mako comic, meant to be this year, but with the delay to the Azula comic, you assume that roughly delays the Mako comic out of the year. And we realistically have, I think I calculated it, if we don't get the Mako comic announcement by July, we're probably not getting it this year. So that's another frustrating thing. But like I said, any final things that we want to discuss? Otherwise, I'm probably going to wrap up the stream now. After all this solid lore discussion that we had here. So I think it went pretty well overall. Pretty happy with how it went. Obviously, like, it's always a tough one where you do these sort of like counter criticism discussions, because you kind of feel like, am I being a little bit unfair here with how I'm presenting like the opposing side of the issue, and like, especially when we potentially don't have like anyone or even that many people in the chat who are like agreeing with the kind of like criticisms. It's a tough one, but I tried to do my best to like just cover it as clearly as possible and be as fair about it as I could possibly be, given that like I have my own thoughts, people have their thoughts. But again, in this case, it's always going to be a tricky one to try and like defend and justify the opinion that you view like fundamental lore of the way Avatar works as being a problem. And that's a bit of an issue, but we do what we can here to try and make this happen, because like, yeah, people are allowed to have their opinions on things ultimately. But yeah, I do always find it interesting that like book 2 kind of maligned, but Beginnings is rated well, but then there's this separate group that dislikes it for lore based reasons. But that's always just gonna happen. These things always happen. But thanks everyone for coming out watching the stream today. We will be back with another stream in April, and I hopefully should have at least one Avatar news video next week, covering some of the kind of Kyoshi casting things that just came out, and hopefully some other stuff as well. Hopefully in the next 2-3 weeks the Yang Chen book gets announced, but we don't really know. So yeah, that's been the video, the stream. Thanks for watching everyone, and bye.